In some ways, it seems that people of every era believed that the future would be, well, futuristic. In the same way that the Jetsons portrayed a world of flying cars, 19th century railroad visionaries conceived a monorail-style, high-speed train that would transport passengers to their destination in style and comfort of the then modern-day cutting edge. And although a prototype was built, the dream fell apart. But why? Join us to find out, as today we discover the rise and fall of the lost Meigs Railway. I'm your host Ryan Socash, and you're watching It's History. Our story really starts during the 19th century, which was a pivotal period in the development of trains and railways. And it's important to note that at the onset of the century, trains were primarily powered by steam engines. The first full-scale operational steam locomotive was George Stephenson's Rocket, built in 1829. It introduced several innovative design elements, such as a multi-tubular boiler, significantly improving efficiency. This design became the model for many future locomotives. In the United States, locomotive technology evolved rapidly, with figures like Peter Cooper developing the Tom Thumb in 1830, a compact locomotive known for its use in the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. As the 19th century progressed, locomotive design saw significant advancements, such as the introduction of the compound locomotive. This development used steam expansion in multiple stages to increase efficiency and power. Furthermore, using more robust materials such as iron and later steel enabled the construction of larger and more powerful locomotives. Then, there were innovations in wheel arrangements, such as the development of the 4-40 American-type locomotive. That improved traction and stability. The design of trains and railways also evolved to accommodate different terrains and specific transportation needs, creating specialized locomotives such as those designed for mountainous regions or rapid passenger transportation. Hence, the 19th century was a period of continuous experimentation and improvement, laying the foundation for the extensive railway networks that we rely on today. And along the way, some rather crazy ideas came about. One such oddity was the Meigs Elevated Railway, the thought child of Joe Meigs, whose full name was Joseph Vincent Meigs, but he went by Joe. Joe was born into a well-connected family in Nashville, Tennessee. His father was an attorney and was said to be a friend of Abraham Lincoln. With that in mind, during the American Civil War, Joe served as a captain in the Union Army and claimed to have personally appealed to President Lincoln to allow him to raise a group of black soldiers for a colored artillery battery. This marked the first instance of such a unit serving in the war, and I should probably go ahead and point out the obvious that the family no longer lived in Tennessee at that point. Anyhow, after the war, Joe pursued a career as a lawyer in Washington. While there, he formed a close friendship with another veteran, General Benjamin Butler, and the duo relocated to Lowell, Massachusetts, where they built houses nearby. General Butler became a prominent state politician and eventually served as governor in 1882. Meanwhile, Joe Meigs demonstrated his talent as an inventor. He is credited with inventing the Meigs rifle and held several firearm patents. His profession was listed as an inventor in the 1880 U.S. Census and the 1889 Lowell City Directory. In the early 1870s, Joe Meigs came up with the idea for a rapid transit system and received a patent for it in 1875. And this is where our story gets interesting. Around the same time, in 1872, the Adler-Schott narrow gauge suspension railway was built in England and served as a significant inspiration for things to come in the States. So, with the help of his social connections in Massachusetts, including his friend General Butler, Joe attracted significant financial support to see if he could make an improved version of that British system. And so it was. By 1881, the two established the Meigs Elevated Railway Company with General Butler as the president. The company set up its headquarters at 225 Bridge Street, which is now the Monsignor O'Brien Highway in East Cambridge. on the site previously occupied by the Bay State Glass Company. They began lobbying for a state charter that would allow them to build rapid transit lines in Boston and its suburbs. It took a few years, but the company was finally granted a state charter in 1884 with an authorized share capital of $200,000 or $6 million in today's money. However, the two had to wait to start public construction, as the charter required approval from the Boston City Council for any construction within the city limits. But as proof of theory, they were allowed to build a short experimental line at their East Cambridge site. The company's charter also stated that they could only request track locations in Boston once they had built and operated at least 1 mile of railway. Furthermore, the safety and strength of the structure, rolling stock, and motive power had to be examined and approved by the Board of Railroad Commissioners or a qualified engineer. But the team was determined, and hence in 1885, Joe Meigs made some changes to his design, obtained a new patent, and construction followed shortly thereafter. It didn't take long for a short section of the elevated railway to be built, showcasing the system's advantages and capabilities, as required by their charter. For convenience, the 227-foot iron demonstration line was set up on land next to the company's headquarters on Bridge Street and opened to paying passengers in June of 1886. The company had permission to run this line over Bridge Street, terminating on the property where John P. Squire and Company's hog slaughterhouse was located. It should be noted that the actual construction of the demonstration line was carried out by a separate company founded by Meigs himself, called the Meigs Elevated Railway Construction Company, which was responsible for building future railway lines. The short iron demonstration line was connected to the car shed by a longer wooden section designated to test the system's capabilities. A surviving photograph shows the different construction elements in the setup. The rolling stock for this railway consisted of 3 components: a locomotive, a tender, and a passenger car. In July of 1886, an article titled "The Meigs Elevated Railway" was published in Scientific America, stating that everything had functioned to satisfaction, with the train navigating sharp curves and climbing steep grades without difficulty. The passenger car had a floor made of sturdy C-channel beams measuring 51.16 feet long and 7.5 feet wide. Its cylindrical body was crafted from lightweight iron T-bars bent into a circle with a diameter of 10.7 feet. The promotional material highlighted the luxurious features, both inside and out. The circular shape and rounded ends allowed for robust construction without unnecessary weight. The interior was adorned with rich upholstery, and the exterior was sheathed in paper and copper to improve strength and reduce wind resistance. Inside, the car was spacious and well lit. The seats were plush and comfortable, upholstered to ensure a luxurious experience. Each window featured a unique device for ventilation, minimizing dust and ensuring passenger safety in case of an accident. The car had no sharp corners to reduce the risk of passenger injury. However, there was no mention of insulation or heating arrangements for the winter, and copper sheathing seen in the surviving photo indicated cheaper materials. The passenger car had 2 rows of rectangular windows on each side, with the frames between the iron hoops. Entry and exit were via open platforms at the ends and swing doors with glass panels and spring closures. Lighting was provided by hanging oil lamps. The interior featured padded and upholstered seating along the sides, accommodating 72 passengers. Notably, there was no provision for standing passengers, and there needed to be handholds for them. The tender was a separate vehicle from the locomotive, connected only by coupling. It was styled like the passenger coach but shorter, measuring only 24.5 feet. It had 2 rows of 6 windows on each side and contained a water tank, a coal bunker, and extra space for various purposes. The potential use for parcel traffic should have been explicitly mentioned. The locomotive shared the same cylindrical style with similar dimensions and windows. It had a glazed turret as the engineer's cab with a forward and side view, while drawings showed a 360-degree view for future trains in service. And perhaps obviously, as this was intended to be an elevated train, the locomotive lacked a cowcatcher. It had two close-together locomotive trucks, each with a pair of gripper driving wheels connected to a single boiler. The locomotive's specifications included a fire tube boiler, 200 tubes, cylinders, and hydraulic power for various operations. A control mechanism for coupling rods allowed for the safe detachment of cars in case of an emergency, reducing the risk of collisions. Overall, the design and features of both the tender and locomotive were part of Meigs' system, emphasizing safety and functionality. And as promising as everything seemed, it wouldn't take long for the whole operation to go off the rails. On the night of February the 4th, 1887, a fire, suspected to be an act of arson, broke out and caused significant damage. It destroyed Joe Meigs' car shed and the experimental coach, but luckily, the locomotive and the tender were spared. Meigs estimated this damage at $10,000, approximately $250,000 in today's money. Even so, in 1887, Joe Meigs published a detailed explanation of how his urban transit system would operate, complete with diagrams and statistics. He titled it the Meigs Railway System, the reason for its departure from the ordinary practice. This work was published later that year, and he followed it up with a privately published booklet in 1888 called The Mechanics of the Meigs Railway. Yet sadly, despite his efforts, no urban rapid transit system outside of Boston adopted his system. Some cities considered the concept seriously, such as the Lake Street Elevated Railroad in Chicago, which initially planned to use it when chartered in 1888. But eventually opted for a conventional design. There was also some international interest, with a publication in Paris, France, in the same year by Charles Therion, which referred to the system as a monorail, but no substantial progress came from this. The Massachusetts charter was renewed in 1888, but in December of the same year, the first electric streetcar line in Boston was finally inaugurated, leaving this bizarre idea dead in the water. Meigs' experimental establishment in East Cambridge was put on hold in 1891 as the inventor continued to advocate for his system to connect Boston and Cambridge and voiced his opposition to the new electric traction. Finally, in 1893, he published another booklet titled True Rapid Transit, rejecting both subway construction and the use of electric power, insisting that steam engines were more cost-effective. In April of that year, the Cambridge experimental train made a single trip, which turned out to be its last. Frankly, the inventor was behind on the times, as advocating for steam technology when electric urban transit had already taken hold was absurd. The experimental line was finally dismantled in 1894, not due to failure, but because it had served its purpose. Meigs still naively anticipated beginning construction of a Boston-Cambridge line soon. Still, his plan was not meant to be. In July of 1894, the Boston Elevated Railway Company was established to construct a standard elevated rail line connecting Boston to Cambridge, Roxbury, Charlestown, and South Boston. Joe Meigs secured the franchise for this project. However, he remained steadfast in his opposition to using electric power, discouraging potential investors and the public. Consequently, he was unable to secure any funding for the construction. In 1896, he decided to sell the franchise and ultimately abandon the project. The downfall of the Meigs Elevated Railway was primarily due to the Boston investors' rejection of Joe Meigs' approach. When the Boston Elevated Railway reverted to a conventional design, the financial challenges were resolved, and the first section of the elevated railway was opened in 1901. Just a few years later, Joe Meigs passed away from a stroke at his home in Charlestown in 1907. He was buried according to the customs of the Unitarian Church. As I mentioned at the top of the video, the 19th century had plenty of crazy concepts for unconventional rail systems. There was an atmospheric railway, a system that used a pipe laid between the rails to create a vacuum. Then there was a proposed concept in 1812 for a flying train, suggesting the combination of steam propulsion and wings to lift the train off the tracks. The steam horse was also a steam locomotive design to resemble a horse, with the engines placed inside the horse-like frame. The idea was to make people more comfortable with this new mode of transportation by making it look like something they were already familiar with. It was a curious attempt to bridge the gap between the old and new technology, which I suppose is the point of having an imagination and attempting something that no one else believes in. Meigs' biggest mistake was his obsession with steam, an already antiquated technology that no one in an urban setting wanted, which I suppose brings us to the end of the story. So thank you for watching, and until next time, I'm Ryan Socash, signing off.